I'm Thea, 30 female. I live in a moderately sized city with my fiancé, Kyle, in a condo we've slowly been renovating ourselves. I'm an architectural designer, which means I spend my days creating beautiful, functional spaces for other people, a skill that would soon become ironically crucial in dismantling and rebuilding my own life. This is the story of how my family's blatant favoritism pushed me to a breaking point, and how I used their own logic against them to serve the coldest dish of revenge they ever saw coming. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, there was always a clear hierarchy in our household. There was Poppy, and then there was me. Poppy, my older sister by 2 years, was the sun around which our family's universe orbited. She was effervescent, charming, and knew exactly how to play the part of the perfect daughter. She had a flair for the dramatic and a talent for making everything about her, a trait our parents, Samantha and Charles, not only tolerated but actively encouraged. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. The practical, logical daughter who got good grades, didn't cause trouble, and was largely self-sufficient. I was the sturdy foundation of the house, while Poppy was the dazzling chandelier in the foyer. Everyone notices the chandelier. No one pays attention to the foundation until something goes wrong. This dynamic was never more apparent than during the planning of Poppy's wedding. She got engaged a year before I did, to a man who was perfectly nice but seemed perpetually swept up in the whirlwind that was Poppy. The moment a ring was on her finger, my parents went into overdrive. My father, Charles, a financial advisor who prided himself on prudent investments, suddenly saw no expense as too great. My mother, Samantha, a retired teacher, dedicated her entire existence to bringing Poppy's dream wedding to life. Their excitement was palpable, and in the beginning I was happy for my sister. I truly was. But as the months rolled on, the sheer scale of the event became staggering. Poppy, an event planner by profession, had a vision that was less a wedding and more a royal coronation. She wanted a historic estate for the venue, a custom-designed couture gown, a 10-piece band, and a 5-course meal curated by a celebrity chef. I remember sitting in on one of the planning meetings, held at my parents' dining room table, where the budget was being discussed. The numbers being thrown around were astronomical. I saw an invoice for flowers that cost more than my first car. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" I had asked gently, looking at the spreadsheet he was meticulously updating. "This is adding up to be a lot." My father, who had once given me a 45-minute lecture on the folly of buying brand-name cereal, just smiled. "It's Poppy's special day, Thea. You only get one of those. We want to give her the best." The final bill for Poppy's wedding came to just over $75,000. $5,000. My parents paid for every single cent. They cashed out some investments, dipped into their savings, and talked about it as the best money they'd ever spent. The wedding itself was a spectacle. Poppy looked like a princess, gliding down the aisle in her $1,000 shoes, the train of her dress so long it required 2 of her bridesmaids to manage. The reception was opulent, with ice sculptures and a champagne tower. My parents looked on, beaming with a pride so intense it was almost blinding. I played my part as the dutiful maid of honor, fixing Poppy's train, holding her bouquet, and giving a speech about sisterhood that felt more like a work of fiction than a heartfelt tribute. I smiled for the photos and toasted to her happiness, all while a small, quiet part of me felt an unsettling sense of imbalance. It wasn't jealousy over the wedding itself. I never wanted something so extravagant. It was the principle. The blatant, unapologetic display of favoritism was a flashing neon sign that only I seemed to see. A year later, my life took a wonderful turn when my long-term boyfriend, Kyle, proposed. Kyle is a civil engineer, a man as steady and reliable as the bridges he helps build. Our relationship was a partnership, built on mutual respect, shared goals, and a quiet, comfortable love. We weren't flashy people. We wanted a wedding that reflected us, simple, intimate, and meaningful. When we announced our engagement, my parents' reaction was pleasant. They hugged us, said congratulations, and Mom immediately asked, "So, have you set a date?" There wasn't the frantic, excited energy that had surrounded Poppy's engagement. There were no immediate offers to start a planning binder or calls to secure venues. It was the kind of polite enthusiasm you'd show a neighbor's kid who just graduated. Kyle and I had already discussed our plans. We wanted a small ceremony at a local botanical garden and a relaxed reception at our favorite restaurant, which had a beautiful private room. Our total budget was a modest $15,000, a sum we had diligently saved and were prepared to pay for ourselves. We weren't expecting a handout, but based on the precedent set by Poppy's wedding, I harbored a naive hope that my parents might offer to contribute something, even a small fraction of what they'd given my sister. It would have been a gesture, a symbol that my happiness and my milestone moments were just as important to them. We invited my parents and Poppy over for dinner to share our plans. I laid out our vision for the day, the beautiful gardens, the cozy restaurant, the focus on good food and good company rather than extravagance. "That sounds lovely, dear," my mother said, sipping her wine. "Very practical, just like you." The word practical was dropped like a small, weighted stone. It wasn't a compliment. In our family's language, practical was code for boring or less than. Poppy was dazzling, creative, visionary. I was practical. "And we've been saving up," Kyle added, placing a reassuring hand on my arm. "We're really excited to be able to host a day that feels like us, without starting our marriage in debt." My father nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. "Very responsible," he said, and my heart sank a little further. Responsible was the twin sister of practical. It was the pat on the head you give the child who doesn't ask for much. I waited, holding my breath for them to say something more to offer some support. The silence stretched. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. "Well, speaking of the wedding," he began, and a flicker of hope ignited within me. "Your mother and I were talking, and we have a wonderful idea that will help you save a significant amount of money." This was it, I thought. Maybe they were going to offer to pay for the venue or the catering. "It's about your dress," my mother chimed in, her eyes twinkling as if she were about to bestow upon me the greatest gift imaginable. "We have the perfect solution." "We have the perfect solution," my mother repeated, her smile widening. I leaned forward, genuinely curious and still clinging to that fragile thread of hope. Kyle gave my hand a supportive squeeze under the table, sensing the importance of this moment. My father, Charles, took the lead, adopting his financial advisor tone, as if he were presenting a can't-miss investment opportunity. "A wedding dress is a huge expense, Thea. An emotional purchase that gets worn once and then sits in a box for 50 years. It's not a sound investment." "Okay," I said slowly, unsure where this was going. "Poppy's dress was exquisite," my mother continued, her voice filled with reverence. "A true work of art, and it's been professionally cleaned and preserved. It's just sitting in its box in our attic." The air in the room seemed to thin. I could feel Kyle stiffen beside me. A cold, heavy feeling began to settle in my stomach as the implication of her words slowly dawned on me. She couldn't possibly mean. "So," my father concluded with a flourish, as if he just solved a complex equation, "we thought you could wear Poppy's dress for your wedding. It's already paid for. It would be your something borrowed, and it would save you thousands of dollars." He beamed at me, genuinely proud of this solution. My mother nodded eagerly, her expression a mixture of sentimentality and self-congratulation. They looked at me, expecting gratitude, perhaps even tears of joy. What they got was a stunned, deafening silence. I stared at them, my mind racing to process the sheer audacity of the suggestion, Poppy's dress. They wanted me to walk down the aisle to marry Kyle, the man I loved, in the shadow of my sister's extravagant wedding. The dress wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a symbol of the entire $75,000 spectacle they had bankrolled for her. It represented everything I wasn't: the princess, the center of attention, the daughter who was worth investing in. Offering me her dress wasn't a kindness. It was a reinforcement of my status as the second best, the afterthought, the recipient of hand-me-downs. Poppy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "It's a brilliant idea, isn't it?" she said, her voice dripping with false generosity. "The dress is stunning, Thea. You'd look beautiful in it. It might need a few alterations, of course. You're a bit straighter than I am." The subtle dig at my body was the final straw. The cold feeling in my stomach turned into a hot, rising anger. I looked from my sister's smug face to my parents' expectant ones. They didn't see it. They genuinely did not understand how deeply insulting their offer was. To them, it was just practical, economical, responsible. They had spent a fortune to make Poppy feel unique, ND special, and now they were asking me to erase my own identity on my wedding day to save a few bucks. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. The smiles on their faces faltered. "No," my mother repeated, confused. "What do you mean no? It's a gorgeous dress." "I mean, no, I will not be wearing Poppy's wedding dress," I clarified, my voice gaining strength. "I appreciate the thought," I added, a lie that tasted like acid, "but I want to choose my own dress. The experience of picking it out is important to me." My father frowned. "Thea, don't be emotional about this. It's a practical decision. Think of the savings. That money could go towards a down payment on a house." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "Did you tell Poppy to be practical when she wanted a $10,000 dress?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Did you tell her the money could go towards a house?" The mood in the room shifted instantly from cheerful to tense. My father's face hardened. "That's different, and you know it," he said dismissively. "Why?" I pressed, unable to stop myself. "Why is it different? Why did her wedding merit a $75,000 investment, while mine merits a lecture on practicality and a hand-me-down dress?" "We just thought it would be a nice way to pass something down," my mother said defensively, her eyes welling up with tears. It was her go-to tactic. When confronted, she would retreat into the role of the wounded, misunderstood mother. "A family heirloom." "It's not an heirloom," I countered, my voice rising. "It's a 2-year-old dress that you bought for my sister. An heirloom is my grandmother's locket, which, by the way, you also gave to Poppy." This was true. The small, delicate gold locket that had belonged to our grandmother, which I had always adored, was given to Poppy as her something old for her wedding. I hadn't even been considered. Kyle, ever the calm in my storm, finally stepped in. "With all due respect, Charles, Samantha," he said, his tone polite but unwavering, "this is our wedding. Thea deserves to have the experience she wants, and that includes choosing her own dress. We've budgeted for it, and we are not asking for your financial help." His support was a lifeline, but it did little to quell the storm brewing inside me. The argument escalated. My parents accused me of being ungrateful and jealous of my sister. Poppy chimed in, saying I was always so sensitive and was ruining a perfectly lovely family dinner. The more they pushed, the more I realized this wasn't just about a dress. It was about a lifetime of being minimized, of my achievements being met with polite nods while Poppy's were celebrated with parades. It was about the fundamental inequality that had defined our family dynamic for 30 years. The dinner ended with me in tears of frustration and my mother crying tears of manipulation. My father was stoic and angry, while Poppy looked thoroughly pleased with the drama she had helped create. Kyle and I left my parents' house that night with a heavy cloud hanging over us. The joy and excitement for our wedding had been tainted, replaced by a bitter resentment. In the car on the way home, I was silent, replaying the conversation over and over in my head. It was Kyle who finally broke the silence. "I am so sorry, Thea," he said, his voice soft. "You didn't deserve any of that. They were completely out of line." "They don't see it, Kyle," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "They genuinely believe they were doing me a favor. They see me as the sensible one, so they think I don't want or deserve the same things Poppy does. They've spent my entire life putting me in a box, and now they expect me to get married in one of Poppy's old boxes." That night, as I lay in bed, the anger began to cool and something else took its place: clarity. The fog of familial obligation and the lifelong habit of accepting my secondary role began to lift. My parents had made their position clear. They had shown me, in no uncertain terms, my exact value in their eyes. The question was, what was I going to do about it? My initial plan was just to move forward, pay for our own wedding, and try to forget their hurtful words. But a new thought, sharp and insistent, began to form in my mind. Forgiveness was one thing, but allowing this deep-seated injustice to stand was another. This wasn't just about a dress anymore. This was about fairness. And my father, the financial advisor, had taught me one thing very well: numbers don't lie. The days following that disastrous dinner were fraught with a tense, manufactured peace. My mother, Samantha, sent a series of text messages that were dripping with passive aggression. "Just wanted to say I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt. I was only trying to help," read one. Another said, "I hope we can all move past this and focus on your happy day." There was no real apology, no acknowledgement of the core issue. It was a classic maneuver designed to paint me as the oversensitive one who couldn't take a well-intentioned suggestion. I gave polite, non-committal replies, but inside, a quiet revolution was taking place. The initial sting of the insult had morphed into a cold, analytical resolve. My parents and Poppy had operated on the assumption that I would eventually get over it, accept my place, and everything would go back to normal. They had underestimated me. They saw Thea, the practical, quiet daughter. They had forgotten about Thea, the architectural designer, the woman whose job it was to look at a flawed structure, identify its weaknesses, and design a better, stronger one. My family's structure was deeply flawed, and I was about to start drawing up new blueprints. My fiancé, Kyle, was my rock through all of this. One evening, about a week after the Dressgate incident, I was sitting at our kitchen island, staring blankly at a wedding spreadsheet on my laptop. Kyle came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. "Still thinking about it?" he asked gently. I sighed, leaning back against him. "I can't stop thinking about it. It's not just the dress, Kyle. It's the $75,000. It's the fact that they could do that for her, and for me, they offer a cast-off. My dad is a financial advisor. He preaches about fairness and smart investments. How can he not see this as the most lopsided, emotionally bankrupt investment a parent could make?" Kyle was quiet for a moment, then he said something that would become the catalyst for everything that followed. "You know, your dad is meticulous about records. He keeps files for everything. I bet he has a record of every dollar he gave Poppy." A light bulb went on in my head. He was right. My father was almost obsessive about his financial records. He had binders and spreadsheets for household expenses, vacations, and car maintenance. It was inconceivable that he wouldn't have a detailed ledger for an expenditure as massive as Poppy's wedding. "He called it an investment in her happiness," I said, a new idea taking root. "And he's always said that any significant financial gift to one of us kids would be treated as an advance on our inheritance, to be reconciled later to ensure things are fair." This was a rule he had drilled into us since we were teenagers. When he helped Poppy with a down payment on her first car, he'd made a note in his family ledger, explaining that an equivalent amount would be credited to me in the future. It was his way of maintaining the illusion of perfect fairness. "So, the 75 grand for the wedding," Kyle said, following my train of thought, "should technically be on that ledger, as an advance on Poppy's inheritance." "Exactly," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "But I bet he never logged it. I bet that was a gift, not an advance, because it was for Poppy. For the golden child, the rules are different." The next weekend, I went over to my parents' house under the guise of wanting to look through some old photo albums for our wedding slideshow. It was a plausible excuse, and my mother, eager to smooth things over, was delighted. While she was busy in the kitchen making tea, I made my way to my father's home office. It was his sanctuary, a room filled with oak furniture, leather-bound books, and rows of neatly labeled filing cabinets. My hands were trembling slightly as I scanned the labels. Taxes, insurance, household, and then I saw it: family finances. I pulled the drawer open. It was as organized as I knew it would be. There were folders for Thea education, Poppy car loan. My stomach was in knots. This felt like a huge betrayal of trust, but their betrayal of me felt so much greater. I found the main ledger, a thick binder with spreadsheets detailing every major family expense for the last 15 years. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the entries. There it was, clear as day. A section for Poppy, with the car down payment logged, a loan for her to start her event planning business, with a note that it had been forgiven on her 30th birthday, and various other smaller amounts. I then turned to the period covering her wedding. I scanned the months leading up to the big day, my finger tracing the lines of expenses. I saw payments to our home insurance, property taxes, a vacation to Italy. But there was nothing about the wedding. Not a single entry for the caterer, the venue, the florist, or the $10,000 dress. A sum of $75,000, an amount that would fundamentally alter both my and Poppy's financial futures in terms of inheritance, had simply vanished from the official family record. It hadn't been an advance. It had been a gift, given outside the rules of fairness my father so proudly claimed to uphold. It was a secret transaction designed to maintain the family myth, that both daughters were treated equally. I quickly took out my phone and, with shaking hands, took clear, high-resolution pictures of every relevant page of that ledger. I photographed the pages detailing the loans and gifts to Poppy. I photographed the pages from the year of her wedding, highlighting the conspicuous absence of any of those expenses. I also photographed the page at the very front of the binder, where my father had written his family financial charter, a pompous document he'd typed up himself, which stated, among other things, that all substantial monetary gifts to the children will be recorded and treated as an advance on their portion of the estate to ensure absolute equity. I slipped the binder back into the filing cabinet just as my mother called out that the tea was ready. My heart was pounding, but I felt a strange sense of calm. I had the proof. The numbers didn't lie. For my entire life, I had been told that my feelings of being second best were just in my head, that I was too sensitive. But here, in black and white and Arial font, was the cold, hard evidence that it was real. The inequity wasn't a feeling, it was a documented financial strategy. As I sat with my mother, pretending to laugh at old photos of me with crooked bangs and Poppy in a princess costume, I knew that everything had changed. The plan that had been a vague, angry whisper in my mind was now starting to take shape. It was no longer just about getting my own wedding dress. It was about correcting a balance sheet that had been deliberately falsified for years. My father was a man of numbers and rules. I was about to use his own rules to teach him a lesson in accounting he would never forget. With the photographic evidence secured on my phone, backed up to the cloud, and saved on a separate hard drive, I felt a shift in my perspective. The hurt and anger, while still present, were now channeled into a focused, methodical energy. I was no longer just the wounded daughter. I was a designer with a problem to solve, and the problem was a system built on deceit. Kyle was my co-conspirator and my voice of reason. That evening, I laid everything out for him on our living room floor. I showed him the pictures of the ledger, pointing out the meticulously recorded smaller gifts to Poppy and the glaring, $75,000 sized, whole from her wedding year. I showed him the family financial charter my father had so proudly authored. Kyle listened intently, his engineering mind processing the data. He just pretended it didn't happen, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. He spent all that money and deliberately didn't record it, breaking his own primary rule. Exactly, I said. He broke his rule to favor Poppy, and then had the nerve to lecture me on being practical and responsible. He didn't want the official record to show the massive disparity. He wanted to maintain plausible deniability, to always be able to say he was fair. So what's the next step? Kyle asked. Are you going to confront him with this? Not yet, I replied, my mind already working through the phases of my project. A direct confrontation right now will just result in a huge fight. They'll gaslight me, call me a snoop, and my mom will cry. They'll make it about my methods, not their actions. I need more than just the ledger. I need to understand the full picture. My investigation began to widen. The first piece of the puzzle was understanding my parents' current financial situation. My father portrayed himself as a comfortable but careful man. Was the $75,000 a drop in the bucket for them, or was it a significant sacrifice? This was crucial. If they were fabulously wealthy, the gift was purely about favoritism. If it had been a financial strain, it made their subsequent treatment of me even more egregious. I started by doing some discreet online research. My father's financial advisory firm was well established. Public records provided an estimate of the business's value. Property records showed what they paid for their house and its current estimated value. It was clear they were well off, but not extravagantly rich. A $75,000 expenditure would have been a major, noticeable hit to their liquid savings or investment portfolio. It was a sacrifice, and they had chosen to make it for only one of their children. The next step was to understand Poppy's financial situation. She lived a lifestyle that always seemed a step above what her career as a freelance event planner should have supported. She drove a newer car, went on frequent vacations, and her apartment was stylishly decorated. I had always suspected my parents were subsidizing her life, and the forgiven loan in the ledger for her business startup confirmed part of it. But I needed to know more. This is where things got a little more complex. I would never illegally access her accounts, but people, especially my sister, have a tendency to overshare their lives on social media. I spent an evening scrolling through years of Poppy's Instagram and Facebook posts. It was a digital diary of her spending habits. There were photos from a trip to Bali, a ski trip to Aspen, and a long weekend in New York for a Broadway show. Each photo was a data point. I cross-referenced the dates of these trips with the family ledger. Interestingly, a few of the more expensive-looking trips seemed to coincide with periods when my parents had made undocumented cash withdrawals, which I remembered my mom vaguely mentioning for home renovations that never seemed to happen. It was circumstantial, but it painted a picture of a steady, off-the-book stream of support. The most damning piece of information, however, came from an unexpected source. My aunt, my mother's sister, was a bit of a gossip but had always had a soft spot for me. I called her under the pretense of asking for a family recipe. We chatted for a while, and I casually brought up my wedding planning, mentioning how stressful budgeting could be. "Oh, I know," she said with a sigh. "Your mother was so stressed during Poppy's wedding planning. Charles was in a state for months." "Really?" I asked, feigning surprise. "They seemed so happy about it." "Oh, they were happy for Poppy," my aunt clarified. "But the money, that was a different story. Samantha told me they had to sell a portion of Charles's stock portfolio that he was saving for their retirement. He wasn't happy about it, but Poppy had her heart set on that venue, and you know how she can be. He said it would set their retirement plans back at least 5 years. Bingo! This was the confirmation I needed. It wasn't just a gift. It was a financially irresponsible decision that impacted my parents' own future security, all in the name of appeasing my sister. And after making that massive, long-term sacrifice for her, they couldn't even fathom spending a few $1,000s to allow me the dignity of choosing my own wedding dress. Instead, they offered me the very symbol of that sacrifice as a hand-me-down. The final dot to connect was the dress itself. I needed to know exactly how much it cost. Poppy had been vague, just calling it couture. A little online sleuthing, using photos from her wedding, led me to the designer. A quick, anonymous email to the bridal boutique, posing as an interested buyer with a picture of the dress, got me the answer. The dress, with custom alterations, had cost just under $10,000. The sheer gall of them asking me to wear a $10,000 reminder of their favoritism was staggering. With all this information, the picture was complete and crystal clear. This wasn't a simple case of my parents being more generous to my sister. This was a long-term, calculated pattern of financial and emotional inequality, deliberately concealed to maintain a facade of fairness. They had sacrificed their own financial security for Poppy's temporary happiness, while I was expected to be grateful for the scraps. I organized all my findings into a neat, undeniable presentation. I created a timeline of financial support for Poppy, backed by the ledger photos. I included a summary of my aunt's testimony about the retirement funds. I added a screenshot of the email confirming the price of the dress. I felt like I was preparing a case for trial, and in a way, I was. The jury would be my family, and the verdict would change everything. The time for quiet investigation was over. It was time to draft the plan. The plan came to me not in a flash of anger, but in a moment of quiet clarity. I was sketching a design for a new building at work, focusing on how the structure needed a strong, equitable distribution of load to be stable. Any weak point, any area bearing too much weight, would compromise the entire edifice. It was a perfect metaphor for my family. My parents had placed the entire emotional and financial load on one side, and the structure was about to collapse. My plan wouldn't be a screaming match or a dramatic confrontation. It would be an elegant, architectural solution, a careful demolition, and a thoughtful reconstruction. The plan had two phases. Phase 1 was to establish my own independence and create an unavoidable consequence for their actions. Phase 2 was the financial reckoning. Kyle and I sat down that weekend and made the first big decision. We were getting married in 3 months. We looked at our guest list. It was a small list of about 50 people, our closest friends and the family members who had always shown us genuine love and support. My aunt was on the list. My cousins were on the list. Kyle's entire family was on the list. But 4 names were now conspicuously absent: Samantha, Charles, Poppy, and her husband. "Are you sure about this?" Kyle asked, his expression serious. "Disinviting your parents and sister from your wedding, that's a permanent move, Thea. There's no coming back from that." "They left me no choice," I said, my voice steady. "A wedding is a celebration of love and support. My parents and my sister have shown me that they do not support me, at least not in the way that matters. Their presence at my wedding would be a performance. They would be there to keep up appearances, to play the part of the happy, proud family. I don't want actors at my wedding. I want people who genuinely love and respect us. Them being there would be a lie, and I'm done with the lies." So we proceeded with our planning, but we never sent them an invitation. We didn't make a grand announcement about it. We just didn't send one. We knew the questions would start eventually, and that was part of the plan. A few weeks later, my mother called. "Thea, honey, I was just talking to your aunt, and she mentioned she received your wedding invitation. It's beautiful. I must have missed hours in the mail. You know how the post can be." This was the moment. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my voice calm and even. "It wasn't lost in the mail, Mom. We didn't send you one." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What are you talking about? It must be a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Kyle and I have decided to have a very small wedding with only the people who have been truly supportive of our relationship and us as individuals. After the conversation we had about the dress and the utter lack of respect you, Dad, and Poppy showed me, we didn't feel it would be genuine to have you there." The predictable explosion occurred. There was sputtering, disbelief, and then a torrent of accusations. I was cruel, I was vindictive, I was tearing the family apart. "How could you do this to me?" she wailed. "After everything we've done for you." "That's just it, Mom," I replied, my voice still calm. "What have you done for me? You spent $75,000 to show Poppy she was the most special person in the world, and then you insulted me by offering me her leftovers. You don't get to treat me like a second-class citizen my whole life and then demand a front-row seat at my wedding." I ended the call by telling her that the decision was final and that I would not be discussing it further over the phone. I knew the next call would be from my father, and I was ready. It came less than 10 minutes later. He didn't yell. He was worse. His voice was cold, menacing, and full of authority. "Thea, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it ends now. You will send an invitation to your mother, your sister, and me. You are not going to embarrass this family." "There's no game, Dad," I said, my resolve hardening with every word he spoke. "This is a consequence of your actions. You've made it clear for 30 years that Poppy is your priority. You prioritized her wants over your own financial security. So, I'm simply deprioritizing your want to be at my wedding. It seems fair." "Fair," he scoffed. "You have no idea what's fair." "Oh, I think I do," I said, and this was where phase 2 began. "I have a very clear idea. In fact, I've been reviewing your family financial charter. The one that states all substantial monetary gifts are to be treated as an advance on our inheritance to ensure absolute equity." The line went silent. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the panic starting to set in. "I also have copies of your family ledger," I continued, "which meticulously documents every small gift to Poppy, but seems to be missing a rather large $75,000 entry from 2 years ago. An entry that, according to your own rules, should be logged as an advance against Poppy's share of the estate." The silence on the other end was now so profound it felt like a physical weight. "So here's my proposal," I said, my voice as professional and detached as if I were presenting a design to a client. "You have 2 choices. Choice A is that you accept my decision about the wedding. We get married without you there, and we can discuss our future relationship, or lack thereof, after the fact. Choice B is that I share my findings, the ledger, your charter, the details about your retirement funds, with the rest of the family. With Aunt Sarah, with our cousins, with everyone. I will let them decide what's fair." He finally found his voice, but it was strained, weak. "You wouldn't." "Try me," I said. "Or there's a third option. A way to make this right, at least on paper. A way to prove that you do, in fact, believe in the fairness you preach." "What is it?" he asked, the word choked with a mixture of dread and desperation. "Poppy needs to pay you back," I stated simply. "Not all of it, but she needs to acknowledge the advance. She needs to sign a formal loan agreement, drafted by a lawyer, acknowledging a debt to your estate for the $75,000. It can be a low-interest loan, payable over time, or payable from her portion of the estate upon your death. But it has to be documented. It has to be made official. The books have to be balanced." I told him he had until my wedding day to decide. If Poppy signed the agreement, I might reconsider their attendance. If they refused, I would proceed with sharing the information, and they would be permanently out of my life. The power dynamic had shifted. I had taken their secret and turned it into my leverage. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of my own story. The unsent invitation was not just a rejection, it was a summons, and court was now in session. The 2 weeks leading up to my wedding were the quietest, most nerve-wracking weeks of my life. After my final phone call with my father, a wall of silence descended from my side of the family. There were no more angry calls, no tearful texts from my mother, no snide messages from Poppy. It was an unnerving calm, the kind that comes before a storm breaks. I didn't know if they were furiously planning a counterattack or if my ultimatum had actually forced them into a corner. Kyle and I focused on the final wedding preparations, a welcome distraction. We picked up our rings, confirmed the details with the restaurant, and I had the final fitting for my wedding dress. It was a simple, elegant A-line gown that I had picked out with Kyle and my aunt. It cost a fraction of Poppy's, but when I looked in the mirror, I felt like myself, strong, independent, and happy. It was my dress, my choice, my day. 5 days before the wedding, I received an email. The sender was my father. The subject line simply read, "Family Matter." My heart leaped into my throat. I opened it with a trembling finger. Attached was a single PDF document. It was a formal loan agreement drafted by an attorney. The parties were my parents, Charles and Samantha, and my sister, Poppy. The agreement stated that Poppy acknowledged the $75,000 she received for her wedding as a loan from her parents, to be considered an advance on her inheritance. It detailed a repayment plan that would be forgiven upon their passing, but would be deducted directly from her share of the estate, with a low rate of interest calculated annually to account for inflation, ensuring true equity over time. At the bottom of the document were 3 signatures: Charles, Samantha, and a tight, angry-looking signature that was unmistakably Poppy's. I stared at the document, reading it over and over. They had actually done it. My father, a man ruled by pride and a desire for control, had capitulated. He had been forced to apply his own rules fairly. He had made Poppy officially acknowledge the debt. I could only imagine the screaming matches, the tears, the manipulation that must have taken place in their house to get Poppy to sign that paper. She would have seen it as a profound betrayal. For the first time, our parents had chosen logic and fairness over her feelings. The email from my father was brief and cold. The documentation you requested is attached. Please confirm receipt. We expect to receive our invitations for your wedding by courier tomorrow. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. I had won. I had achieved the impossible. I had forced them to balance the scales. But the victory felt hollow. Their compliance wasn't born from a change of heart or a sudden realization of their unfairness. It was a business transaction, a move made under duress to avoid public embarrassment and to get what they wanted, attendance at the wedding to maintain the family image. They hadn't learned a lesson, they had just been outmaneuvered. I showed the email and the document to Kyle. He read it carefully, a low whistle escaping his lips. "Wow," he said, "she actually signed it. I never thought they'd do it." "He did it to save face," I said, feeling a surprising wave of sadness. "He didn't do it because he thought it was the right thing to do. He did it because he was trapped." "So what now?" Kyle asked, putting his arm around me. "The ball is in your court, Thea. You said you might reconsider if they did this. Do we send the invitations?" I thought about it long and hard. I pictured them at my wedding. My mother with her pained, martyred smile. My father with his cold, resentful glare. Poppy radiating pure hatred. In my direction. They would be there physically, but their spirits would be toxic. They would poison the atmosphere, turning a day of joy into a tense, awkward performance. Their presence wouldn't be a symbol of reconciliation. It would be a symbol of my victory over them, and that's not what I wanted my wedding day to be about. My wedding day was supposed to be the start of my new family with Kyle. It was about building a new foundation, not trying to patch the irreparable cracks in the old one. "No," I said finally, the decision settling in my heart with a sense of peace. "No, we're not sending them." I replied to my father's email. My response was just as brief as his. "Dad, I acknowledge receipt of the document. Thank you for correcting the family ledger." This was an important step in acknowledging the financial inequity that has existed for years. However, this legal document does not erase the emotional damage or the lifetime of favoritism. The decision to disinvite you was never just about money. It was about the consistent lack of respect and consideration. We will be proceeding with our wedding as planned, with our original guest list. The day is about celebrating our union with genuine love and support, and frankly, I know that is not something you, Mom, or Poppy are capable of offering us right now. The debt is settled, but the relationship is not. Thea. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. I then blocked their numbers on my phone. I knew there would be fallout, but for the first time, I didn't care. I had drawn a boundary, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. The confrontation wasn't a single, explosive event. It was a series of calculated moves and quiet, firm decisions. The signed loan agreement was the climax, a silent, contractual admission of their guilt. It was the moment the debt, both financial and emotional, was finally brought into the light. The consequence was that they had fixed the books, but they had lost their daughter in the process. They had balanced their ledger, but in doing so, they had closed their account with me. My wedding day was 5 days away, and I felt lighter than I had in years. I was finally free. Our wedding day was perfect. It wasn't perfect in the way Poppy's had been, with opulent displays and a cast of hundreds. It was perfect because it was ours. The sun shone brightly as we said our vows in the botanical garden, surrounded by 50 people whose faces radiated genuine happiness for us. My aunt stood beside me, her eyes misty, and Kyle's best man, who had been his friend since kindergarten, stood beside him. There were no strained smiles, no undercurrents of tension, no family drama simmering just beneath the surface. It was just love, pure and simple. During the reception at the restaurant, my aunt pulled me aside. "I'm so proud of you, Thea," she whispered, giving my hand a squeeze. "I know that was the hardest thing you've ever had to do. Your mother, she's beside herself. But you did the right thing. You stood up for yourself." "Thank you," I said, my throat thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." "Charles is furious, of course," she continued. "But I think, deep down, he's more shocked than anything. He's a man who believes he's in control of everything. You showed him he wasn't. You played his game by his rules and you beat him." Her words were a comfort, a validation that I wasn't the villain my parents were undoubtedly painting me to be in their version of the story. The aftermath of my decision unfolded slowly. As I had predicted, my parents and sister launched a smear campaign among the extended family. We heard secondhand that I was cold, mercenary, and vindictive. Some relatives took their side, sending us frosty messages or simply cutting off contact. But the ones who mattered, the ones who had always seen the family dynamic for what it was, rallied around us. They understood. Poppy's life, from what I gathered, underwent a significant change. The reality of the signed loan document meant the endless river of cash from our parents dried up. The off-the-books subsidies stopped. Suddenly, she had to live within the means of her actual income. Her flashy lifestyle took a noticeable hit. The Bali trips were replaced by weekends at a local lake. Her designer wardrobe purchases slowed to a trickle. She was reportedly furious, resentful, and felt victimized. In her mind, I hadn't just exposed an injustice, I had stolen her birthright. The fact that she was now legally and financially accountable for the preferential treatment she had enjoyed her entire life was a bitter pill for her to swallow. About 6 months after the wedding, my father reached out. He sent a letter, old-fashioned pen and paper. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was more of a concession, a white flag from a defeated general. He wrote that he regretted the breakdown in communication and that he had always tried to do what as best for both his daughters. He didn't admit fault, but he did say that reviewing his financial records had been an instructive experience. He ended the letter by saying he hoped that, in time, we could find a way to be a family again. I didn't reply right away. I had to sit with it to process what he was saying and, more importantly, what he wasn't. There was no mention of my mother or Poppy. This was his attempt to repair the bridge he had burned. Kyle and I discussed it at length. "He's reaching out," Kyle said. "That's a start, isn't it?" "It's a start," I agreed. "But I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I'm not going back to the way things were." I eventually wrote back. I told him I appreciated his letter. I told him that for us to have any kind of relationship, it would have to be a new one, built on honesty and mutual respect, not on old habits and unspoken rules. I told him it would take time. The process has been slow. I have had a few stilted, one-on-one lunches with my father. The conversations are careful, navigating the minefield of our past. There's an awkwardness there that never existed before, but underneath it, there's a sliver of something new: respect. He sees me not as his quiet, practical daughter, but as a woman who knows her own worth. I have not spoken to my mother or Poppy since before the wedding. My mother is too deeply entrenched in her role as the wounded party, and Poppy, from what I hear, considers me her sworn enemy. Maybe one day that will change, but I'm not holding my breath. My peace of mind no longer depends on their approval. Kyle and I are thriving. We are saving for a house, a real one that we want to design together. Our lives are filled with friends who are like family and family who act like friends. We are building our own foundation, one based on partnership, equality, and the quiet, sturdy love that I once mistook for being practical. I've learned that practical isn't a bad word. It means something is solid, reliable, and built to last. It's the foundation that allows the beautiful things in life to be built upon it. I am no longer the forgotten foundation of a flawed family structure. I am the architect of my own life, and the future I'm building is sound, spacious, and filled with light.